Welcome to this deeplizard course on AI art with Stable Diffusion. My name is Chris, and we are delighted to have you with us. In this lesson, we're going to be covering the environment and setup requirements to generate AI art. The ultimate goal at the end of this lesson is to be able to generate our very first AI art. And in order to do this, we're going to be using Automatic1111 and Stable Diffusion. These are the two core components we're going to need to generate some AI art. Now, the specific goal at the end of this lesson is to be able to generate our first image using artificial intelligence. So let's jump into it. We're going to scroll on here, and I'm on the lesson page for this particular lesson on deeplizard.com. And here I have a list. So this list gets us to what we want, which is to be able to generate an image using Stable Diffusion. So the first thing we're going to need is a GPU, a graphics processing unit. This is going to be the piece of hardware that actually does the computations needed when generating AI art. The next thing we're going to need is Git, G-I-T. Git is a source code management piece of software that makes it easy for us to do two things. Number one, download code from GitHub. And then the second thing that Git allows us to do is to easily manage the version of the particular software that we're using. The next thing on the list is Python, and we have Miniconda here because what we recommend for managing Python is Miniconda. Miniconda makes it very easy to install Python and then also manage all the additional software or libraries that you might end up using when you use Python. Now, the next two items in the list are the core components that we'll be using to generate AI art. The first one is the Stable Diffusion Web UI by Automatic1111. This is a web interface that we can run locally on our own machines, and it makes it really easy to experiment and test with Stable Diffusion without having to write any code. And then finally, we have Stable Diffusion, the model. And Stable Diffusion is the artificial intelligence part of what we'll be doing. It's known as the Stable Diffusion model or Stable Diffusion network. This is the artificial intelligence. So let's go ahead and install these things. But before we do, I just want to take a quick look at the GPU requirements here. So for the GPU, we're going to need a GPU to be able to actually perform the computation necessary to do the examples in this course. Now, it is possible to use Stable Diffusion with a CPU. However, you wouldn't want to do this because it'll probably take you 100 years to finish this course. For example, with a CPU, it can take up to an hour to a few hours to generate a single image. And with a GPU, this time speeds up to only a couple of seconds. So there are two options when it comes to having a GPU or having one available to run the examples in this course. The first one is going to be a local GPU, and that just means that the GPU is on your system, you have it on your computer, and then you'll run everything locally on your own machine. The next possibility is to use a hosted GPU, and in particular, the recommendation if you're following along in this course is to use Google Colab as your hosted GPU. So obviously the downside to using Google Colab is that they restrict what they call compute units. And so while it is possible to complete the examples in this course using the free version of Google Colab, you may run into a restriction where they cut you off for some time. The only way that this problem can be alleviated is for you to wait for them to allow you more compute units, or to check out the Google Colab plans, which I have a link to those plans here on deeplizard.com. The problem with the local GPU is that you may not have a beefy GPU. You may have a GPU that's slow. And so one of the things that I recommend is that if you do have a slow GPU, you can run everything you can use two. You can use your local machine and you can use Google Colab. And then you can be running computations on both machines, and that can speed you up a little bit. So with the local GPU, to figure out how well your GPU is going to do, the best way is just to get this software installed and then to test generating an image. You can see how fast does your particular GPU generate images with Stable Diffusion. With that being said, let's get to what I'm calling the quick setup for Automatic1111 and Stable Diffusion so that we can get the needed software installed, and then we'll be able to actually generate some images. So here we are at the quick setup, and this is what I'm calling the quick setup. It's the fastest possible way to get up and running. So we have 6 steps to complete in terms of installs and configurations before we can start using Stable Diffusion and generating images. Let's go to step number 1. All right, we're here at step number 1, which is to download and install Git, Git. So we have the link to the Git website here. Come to git-scm.com. Download sections right over here. It is worth noting that Git comes automatically or installed by default on many Mac and Linux machines. So I'm going to search on my computer for terminal, and then I'm going to run the terminal app. And I'm going to show you type git -- version, and then you press enter. And we can see here that I do indeed have Git installed. Now, if you're on a Mac, it may prompt you to install the developer tools. So you can just go ahead and do that then. And I'm not sure what it will do on Linux. I think it's just there on Linux by default. All right, the next step is to get Miniconda downloaded and installed. Miniconda is going to be managing the Python environment. So you come here to the Miniconda site and you just check here for the particular your install and get it installed. All right, so whenever we get Miniconda installed, we're going to want to search on our computer and select the Anaconda prompt. So let me just show you what this looks like. We're going to type Anaconda, and the reason for that is that Miniconda is a lightweight distribution of Anaconda, and so we need to use the Anaconda name, and we can see here that we have Miniconda specified, but we want to select the Anaconda PowerShell prompt, or whichever one pops up depending on your operating system. And then we'll get a terminal prompt here, but the difference is that we can see that Miniconda has given us or told us which environment we're on, which is the base environment. So now we have inside of our terminal, we have these environments that we can manage now for Python. So what we want to do is actually create an environment that we can then manage. And to do that, we're going to type the Anaconda command, and we're going to have create, and then we're going to give it a name, which is going to be SD for Stable Diffusion. And then we're going to specify a Python version. 3.10.6 is the one we're going to be using for this course. So we'll just copy this and then jump back into our terminal. I paste by using the right clicker on my mouse. And here we go. We have the Conda create, click enter. All right, and now our environment has been created, and here we can see that we can activate this environment by using this command, which coincidentally is the next step. So let's activate Conda activate SD. And down here we can see how we were on base, and then once we activated the SD environment, we're now on SD. This is where we want to be whenever we launch our Stable Diffusion web UI application. Finally, to fix a bug that I ran into with versions, we want to use pip to install fast API version 0.9. Okay, and then once that's installed, we are ready to go with our Python environment. The rest of the environment will be configured by the Stable Diffusion web UI, or the Automatic1111 UI. And that happens to be our next step here, step number 4. We want to download the Stable Diffusion web UI. So before we actually download it, let's just click on the link. And this takes us to GitHub. And here on GitHub, we can see all of the details about this application. This is an open source application that is freely available to everyone. And for that reason, if you do have a GitHub account, you can come here, and I invite you to come here and star this repo to show your support for this open source application. So to get this Stable Diffusion web UI installed, we're going to use git, and we're going to use this command here, which is git clone. We're going to copy this command and then jump back into our terminal. I'm going to clear. We want to be in our Stable Diffusion environment, and then we want to run the command git clone. So what this is saying, it's saying use git to clone, and what clone is just another word for download. And then we're specifying the link to the GitHub page that we just looked at, the Automatic1111 GitHub user, and then the Stable Diffusion web UI. So let's run this command and it will be downloaded. All right, so actually I wanted to change directory. So I just downloaded this application into the deeplizard directory, but I made a special directory called SD course. And so I'm going to change directories. I'm going to CD into SD course. All right. And now I'm just going to list everything in here. I see that I have this folder called resources. This is the resources folder that you'll get if you enroll into the course. I'm going to run the git command again to download the application because I want it to be here in this folder. So now if I just list the directory, I can show you that we have the Stable Diffusion web UI folder here, and we can just change directories into this folder and then take a look. This is the application. These are all of the files and scripts needed to run the web app. Now I'm here in the file explorer, and I just want to show you that I'm in this particular directory, deeplizard/SD course. And then I have the application that we have just downloaded. I can double click and I can see the same files here that we saw in the terminal. So our next step was to actually move into the downloaded folder, which we did with this CD and specifying the folder name. Now, the next step is that we want to set the version of the downloaded application to the one that we used in this course. Now, if this isn't strictly required, you don't have to do this, but if you want everything that you see performed in the course to be exactly the same as when you're doing it yourself, then you're going to want to not miss this step. So I'm going to copy this and we're going to go to the terminal. I'm going to clear and paste. All right, so let's take a look at this command. We're saying we want to use git and we want to check out. That just means to get a particular version. And this is the version. This is the long, it's called a hash, and every version of a particular software has a hash. Or what am I saying? Every time someone makes a change to the code, there's a new version is created and there's a corresponding hash. So anyways, let's check this version out by clicking enter. Okay, and now we have checked out this version and it's telling us that your head is now at this version. So we've popped our head in at this version and we're looking around here. All right, so now we're here at the end of step number 4, where we want to actually run the Automatic1111 app, and it will install all of the further dependencies that we need. So to do that, we're going to run this launch.py script from our terminal. All right, so we're back here in the terminal. I'm just going to clear this. What we want is we're going to do ls, and I'm just going to show you the script that we're planning to run here, this one, launch.py. So we're going to type Python, and then we can do just version, -- version to see that we're running on the correct version that we set up in our environment. And we need to make sure that we're on our SD environment when we run this, because this is the environment that the dependencies will be installed to. So I'm going to do Python and then launch.py. So now we can see here that installing Torch and Torch Vision, and we expect to see those two because those are, as you may know, the two of the most popular frameworks that we work with in deep learning. Well, really, I was thinking of PyTorch and TensorFlow, but it might as well be Torch and Torch Vision. All right, so we have finished running this launch.py script, and it's telling us that it cannot run without a checkpoint. Find and place a .ckpt file into any of those locations. Which locations? Well, these here are the ones it's looking for. So it's looking in the Stable Diffusion web UI, which is the folder we downloaded. It's looking inside of models and Stable Diffusion. So we need to go find a checkpoint file and place it there. And that just so happens to be the next step. The next step here is to download Stable Diffusion. Download Stable Diffusion. And so we are going to be doing that from a site called Hugging Face. If you're on deeplizard.com, this link here sends you straight to the Stable Diffusion model. Download, it'll start right away. And then what we want to do is place the downloaded model file into this location. So let's just go have a look at Hugging Face. So I'm here on the Stable Diffusion version 1.4 original repo, and what we're looking for is this download the weights section, and we want to download Stable Diffusion version 1.4. Now this is the checkpoint file that the Automatic1111 interface was asking us for, CKPT. So we get this downloaded and then move it into this respective folder here. So I'm here in the Stable Diffusion Web UI folder. I have selected models, and then I found Stable Diffusion, and then I have placed this SD-V1-4 checkpoint file downloaded from Hugging Face in this directory. This means that we have Stable Diffusion on our system, and we are ready to run the Automatic1111 web app again. And this time it'll see, oh, I see the model. So it'll load it for us. So we have just finished with step 5. Now we come to step 6. We want to test the Automatic1111 install with Stable Diffusion. So the steps are to go to the Miniconda prompt, and then we want to navigate to the folder here, and then we want to run the Python launch again. This time we will be able to browse to this URL from our browser, and we'll get the application served to us. We can add a prompt, and we can click generate. And this will be our first AI image ever generated. So let's just go through the full steps. I'm going to search for Anaconda. Well, there it is. I'm just going to click it. So I'm going to search for Anaconda. Then I'm going to conda activate SD for Stable Diffusion. We just changed from base to the Stable Diffusion environment. Now I'm going to change directory into my Stable Diffusion course directory. I'll look, I see the Stable Diffusion Web UI. So I'm going to change directory into the Stable Diffusion Web UI. And I'm going to look, and I'm going to see launch.py. That's the one I want to run. I'm going to do that by typing Python launch.py. Click enter. The application tells us that it's running on this hash. That's what we expect. That's the version we chose. It says here that it's loading the weights from our checkpoint file, and we are running on a local URL. So hit control, double click the URL. Somehow I managed to open it twice. Okay, and here we are. This is the Automatic1111 Stable Diffusion Web UI. So by the end of this course, if this is looking kind of confusing to you and maybe a little bit intimidating, you won't be intimidated by the end of this course. But for now, we're going to go with the most basic thing possible. We're going to type a prompt. We're going to type lizard, and we're going to click generate. And here we get back a lizard. My very first AI art ever was of a lizard. Great. So if you made it this far and you were able to generate an AI image of your very own, congratulations. The last thing that I want to look at before we close this lesson is I want to show you a couple of ways that you can think about checking the speed of generation for your particular GPU. So number one is you can just click generate, and then you can look up here and see how long it takes. That's one way. The other way is to turn the batch size up. See, I'll do 10, click generate. And then from here, while it's generating, you can flip over to your Anaconda prompt, and you can see in the prompt that you get this output here telling you that the application is working. So over here, you can see the number of iterations per second. So the higher this is, the better. And we can see that I'm running at about almost 6 iterations per second. Here it's telling me that my total time is 3. It says 3 seconds for each image that's being generated. And this is how you can kind of know. It's better to look at this so you can see kind of an average of what's going on versus one image. For example, my first one took 4 seconds, and that was just because some other things had to load. But anyway, I'm running on an NVIDIA 3080 Ti laptop edition. And so this is a pretty decent GPU, and I'm running at about 5 to 6 iterations per second. I would say that this is about what you can get on the free version of Google Colab, but I would say a low number would be 1. 1 iteration per second or below that, I would consider that to be pretty low. But let's flip over and see these lizards. So when I did the batch size of 10, we got 10 lizards here. Very interesting. Some of them don't look that great, but by the end of this course, we'll understand. Actually, I kind of like that one. By the end of this course, we'll understand how to get more desirable images in terms of what we want. We'll have the capability to make some nice looking lizards. Oh yeah, and if you wanted to click through, that's a good one. If you wanted to click through all of them, you can also do that. You don't have to just look at the square, the grid. But anyway, we'll learn a lot more about this as we move on in the course. So that is it. That is how you generate AI art and with Automatic1111 and Stable Diffusion. That's how you get up and running as quickly as possible. So what I want to do is just point you to a few additional resources on the website. So here is a list of some options that you might want to consider when running the web app. Some of these are mainly about performance. We have a more detailed section for each of the things that we talked about that gives a little bit more color and a little bit more explanation. And finally, well, actually, let's go back up here. Wanted to show you there's 2 help articles if you're running an AMD GPU or if you're trying to get this up and running on a Mac. So you can come here and find these 2 articles that have some troubleshooting steps. Lastly, I want to mention the FFmpeg and the DaVinci Resolve software. So these 2 pieces of software are 2 pieces that we'll be using later in the course. And FFmpeg, we have the download links here. FFmpeg is an application for processing digital media like anything photo, video, and audio. What we'll be using FFmpeg for is to take our images that we generate from Stable Diffusion and compile them together to make a video file. We'll also be using FFmpeg to add labels on top of our images. Finally, we'll be looking at how to use DaVinci Resolve, which is a professional editing software. It can do video editing, color correction, visual effects, motion graphics, and even audio post-production. And one cool thing about DaVinci Resolve is that it used to cost $250,000 to $850,000 for a license, but now we can access DaVinci Resolve for free. So I have a link here to the Blackmagic Design website where DaVinci Resolve can be downloaded. And I just want to mention as well, if you've ever heard of the Adobe products like Adobe Premiere Pro and After Effects, DaVinci Resolve is basically a competitor to those pieces of software. But instead of it all being separate apps, it's all packaged into a single app when you're using DaVinci Resolve. And lastly, we have the course resources download, which contains assets that we'll be using throughout the course, like image masks and images. So if you're enrolled, then you can go to the course page and download that folder.